Yo guys, what is going on? JPS back for another video, and today we're going to be reacting to London's unfinished motorways. This is a Jay Foreman video. Make sure you guys go subscribe to him because he's an awesome YouTuber and I love his videos. But yeah, smash that like button, smash the subscribe button, consider joining my Patreon, link in the description, and let's get right into this. I didn't even know London had unfinished motorways.
If you've ever tried driving around London, you'll know what a nightmare it is. We Londoners spend longer sitting in traffic jams than anywhere else in the country, and most of us don't even enjoy it. In the 1960s, there were ambitious plans to completely transform London's roads, making jams like these a thing of the past. They made a start in some places, but, as you can see, they didn't finish.
London was not designed for the car. In fact, it wasn't designed at all. It grew in gradual steps, with the Romans, Tudors and Victorians all contributing their own streets, many of which remain today. It's these very same streets that we in the 21st century squeeze onto, trying to get about in our cars, buses and lorries.
Look at this. The quickest way to get from, say, Hampstead to Highbury is to go all the way down to Camden Town, through the complicated one-way system, all the way back up to Holloway and down Holloway Road, which takes ages.
That's
At peak
terrible.
time, the average speed for that journey is a pathetic 10 miles an hour. I can run that fast.
You might think, how can London go on with a road system
That's
as
6
slow
flat
as
pace.
this? Well, they were thinking about that as early as the 1940s. In 1944, a man called Patrick Abercrombie produced the County of London Plan. Its aim? To deal with the looming problem of congestion in London. London was taking a beating in the Blitz, so there was a great opportunity for rebuilding everything. Abercrombie saw it as a chance to give London a new road system fit for the 20th century. In central London, narrow Victorian streets would be bulldozed to make way for wide Paris-style boulevards, and for the suburbs, there'd be wide ring roads going in circles around the city.
Ring roads play a crucial role in modern town planning. Here to explain is transport expert Graham Rhodes.
It's like a beltway.
Ring roads allow vehicles to travel from one side of town to the other without going through the busy middle. So that's fewer traffic jams and faster journeys.
Yep.
Patrick Abercrombie was really ahead of his time because the traffic wasn't so bad in the 40s. People didn't pay much attention to his rather ambitious plans. Planners of the 60s liked Abercrombie's ring roads idea, but they wanted to take it quite literally to a new level. A new type of road that was futuristicer than anything Abercrombie had ever seen, the motorway.
Oh.
6 lanes, a central reservation and hard shoulder for safety, no speed limits back then. The first motorway to open in Britain was the M1, invented in 1959. In
That scares the crap
1966,
out of
for the
me.
first time, motorways were going to be brought right to the heart of the capital.
The plan was to build 4 motorway ring roads in and around London, and the name for the project was Ringways.
Ringway 1 was to form a motorway box around central London. Ringway 2 was further out, making a circle through the middle of the suburbs. Ringway 3 was further out still, roughly following the border of Greater London. And Ringway 4, way out in the countryside, was for traffic that wanted to avoid London altogether. Today, hardly any of it has been built.
The plans were vast, ambitious, disruptive, expensive, and extremely unpopular. Only one complete circle was ever made. You can see evidence of them hastily stitching up the 2 routes today.
Up by South Mimms, the M25 famously splits in twain, leaving a big grassy gap in the middle. That's because it was designed as a couple of slip roads, and the rest of Ringway 3 was meant to go this way.
Today, the M25 has earned itself an infamous reputation in popular culture.
The M25.
It is the most congested motorway in the UK and is increasingly inadequate for the needs of London and the South East.
For example, people travelling from Brighton to Reading use this section of the N25. And people travelling from Croydon, trying to get their flight at Heathrow, use the same section of the N25. Busy, busy, busy.
All on its own, the M25 does a job that was meant to be taken on by 3 motorways. There's no alternative further out, and there's no real alternative further in.
The closest thing London has to a suburban ring road is made up of the North Circular and the South Circular. But they're not much good either.
The North Circular whizzes through the suburbs like a twat going, "Yeah, look at me, out of my way, I'm the I'm the North Circular, hey!" It comes to an abrupt stop at the Woolwich Ferry.
And then, once south of the river, it has a complete change of character, going...
Oh, sorry, excuse me, do you mind if I... Oh, terribly sorry. Excuse me, could I just get... Oh, sorry.
So how did we end up with only half of Ringway 2? In other words, why is North London better than South London?
The reason predates ringways by several decades. The North Circular Road came about in the 30s when much of North London was still being developed, so there was loads of room to make it wide, fast and more or less future-proof. When the ringway scheme came along in 1966, all it needed was a bit of widening here and there. Half the job done. The South Circular, on the other hand, was a different story altogether. The route it takes goes on streets that have been here for centuries. In fact, there isn't really such thing as the South Circular Road at all. It's just a series of scarcely believable road signs.
It was then, and still is now, totally inadequate as a ring road. But widening it was out of the question. To finish Ringway 2, they needed to build a completely new South Circular that was as much of a twat as the North. But to build a 20th century road through 19th century suburbs, it was a case of ploughing through whatever buildings were unlucky enough to be in the way. This nice street was on their hit list.
The best way to see the destruction the new road would have caused is to look from above. A total of 36,000 people in suburbs like Beckenham and Crystal Palace would have their homes exploded to make way for the new road. One look at this terrifying artist's impression and the planners decided it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
So Ringway 2 was cancelled and Outer London was spared. But in central London, traffic was at such a standstill that something had to be done. So in 1967, a small section of motorway was given the go-ahead.
London's Westway twists and turns from White City to Marylebone. Although technically not part of ringways, it gives us a perfect view of what Ringway 1, the motorway box, would have looked like, and how it would have affected the surrounding area.
It was the construction of the Westway that woke London up to the reality of what a city throttled by a motorway box would be like. Just like here in Notting Hill, many more parts of inner London would have a motorway like this blasted through the middle.
Including Kilburn, Camden, Canonbury, Brixton and Battersea.
The locals were understandably not happy, and they protested.
Londoners took to the streets to oppose what they saw as the destruction of their city. And if that wasn't enough of a headache for the Greater London Council, the Treasury weren't happy about how much the ringway scheme was going to cost.
I feel like that's not just London, though. I mean, even near me, there's like protests to not widen the highway. But at the same time, like, you kind of need to in some areas. I don't know. That's why it's such a heated debate, because there's two sides to it. But that's everywhere, man.
There were some heated
hard
discussions at the time between the GLC and the Treasury as to who would finance the London Ringway scheme. Ringway 1 was causing the most controversy as it was the most expensive per mile.
Really?
We estimated it would cost £2 billion. That's £18 billion in today's money.
That's very interesting.
But there was no public support, negative press, so the government decided it could not finance the London Ringway scheme.
A combination of protest, financial woes and political kerfuffle brought an end to Ringways 4, 3, 2 and 1.
Is he hitting a bong
So what
there?
legacy remains of Ringways today?
Looking on a map, there are flecks of Ringway 4, which in some parts of Hertfordshire is confusingly called the North Orbital Road. The short and stubby West Cross route in Shepherd's Bush was planned as part of Ringway 1, and so was the East Cross route. Until the year 2000, these were both shown in blue as proper motorways on the map.
Also, when Ringways was cancelled, it had a knock-on effect, and lots of other road building projects were cancelled too, including some that they'd already started.
The M23 from Brighton stops at this mysterious unfinished junction just after the M25, instead of Ringway 2, where they wanted it to finish. Here's another example, the M1, which stops at Staples Corner. You can see on Google Earth they left plenty of room at this junction for it to carry on further south, but without Ringway 1, there was nowhere for it to end. If built to plan, the M1 would have met Ringway 1 at West Hampstead at an enormous triple-layer junction, totally ruining
This
Oh
landscape-
my God.
Really? Surely no one cares about this place. It's tempting when you're in a traffic jam like this one to think about how useful those ringways would have been. But it's a complicated issue. There are pros and cons.
Yeah.
Pro, The motorways would have taken traffic away from the surface streets. This road would be much nicer, quieter and safer if it weren't lumbered with the unenviable task of being the South Circular. Con: 60% of Londoners would have lived 2 miles away from a motorway. They would have been so ugly, so prominent and so everywhere that London would have become famous for them. Pro: with ringways, East London would have got itself a new bridge at Woolwich. Much more convenient than this boat.
Con: the motorways would be physical boundaries, dividing up communities. Londoners would probably identify themselves by which ring roads they were stuck between.
Yeah,
Pro:
probably.
they'd make journeys faster. Con: actually they wouldn't.
Studies have shown time after time that building
Really?
ring roads attracts more cars. Los Angeles is mostly highways, and the traffic jams there are worse than here. Had ringways happened in London, it would have set the precedent that you're supposed to drive. The jams would continue, and ringways would defeat their own purpose.
You have to admire
That is
the
true.
optimism and confidence they had back then. In the 60s, the word progress was a much simpler word.
More cars, taller buildings, wider roads, rebuild everything, more! Everything we do is amazing!
But today's approach is a softer, more cautious one. It's not that we're scared of progress, we're simply scared of cars.
Transport policy today is almost entirely about measures to reduce the number of drivers. The fact that London is such a crazy, improbable maze is possibly the best way to encourage people not to bother with the car and use public transport instead.
The lack of
Yeah.
motorways has allowed areas like Camden to come to life. I think future generations trying to solve the transport problems of their time will be grateful for what the 20th century didn't do. So it
I
looks
agree.
like for the foreseeable future, we'll have to sit in traffic jams no matter what. And if that's true, we might as well sit in our traffic jams and enjoy the view.
Some dark humor in there. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I definitely agree that we shouldn't add more motorways because it's better to discourage driving, because public transport has been shown to be a lot better for the environment because less people are driving. But here in the United States, see, the culture is driving. It's like saying it's like taking guns away. I mean, also it's a lot different. It's hard to get public transport because so much of the United States is rural, and there's so much more space. Such a large country, especially out west. Not much like industry and infrastructure in place for transportation. So a lot of people have to drive, and I don't mean California by out west. I mean kind of the Midwest. But anyways, that was a really interesting video. I had no idea that all these plans were in place. So let me know if you learned something new today in the comments, and comment some stuff for me to check out down below in the future. And I really appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.